the review will be expedited. You discussed with Senator Leahy sharing the results of your review with members of this committee, which I appreciate, but I want the record to be clear. Will you commit to making public to the greatest degree possible the conclusions the executive branch reaches so that the American people and most of all the families who lost loved ones have an opportunity to understand what, if anything, could have been done to prevent this tragedy?
Yeah, in a way that's consistent with ensuring that we don't do harm to the potential trial. I think it is our obligation to make clear to this committee, to the American public, what the results of our investigation are, so that we have a way in which, working with this committee, we prevent further tragedies like occurred at Fort Hood.
General, during town hall meetings and other exchanges I've had with a lot of Wisconsin law enforcement people over the last several years, I've heard that progress has actually been made in combating methamphetamine production and use, which is good news. Unfortunately, there's also been a significant increase in heroin coming into the state, quite possibly as a replacement for meth, and this heroin is often very pure and therefore very dangerous. Wisconsin law enforcement reports not only is that there's increasing violent crime associated with heroin trafficking, but there's also been a disturbing increase in heroin-related deaths. Rock County, my home county in south central Wisconsin, has already had 12 heroin-related deaths this year, and I'm concerned this may be part of a larger nationwide trend. Senator Cole and I have addressed this increase in Rock County by requesting that it receive funding through the High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Assistance Program. But I'd like to know whether this trend is emerging in other states, and what steps is the department taking to reduce heroin trafficking in Wisconsin and elsewhere?
Well, we certainly have seen an increase, chiefly from Mexico, in the movement of heroin into the United States. The problem that you've identified in Wisconsin is one that we see in other parts of the country. I know that Baltimore has a particular heroin problem, but we see it in other states as well. The Department of Justice, in conjunction, well, the DEA is part of the Justice Department, is using all of the tactics we have, all of the skills we have to try to get at that emerging heroin problem. I think a lot of people thought that heroin was a problem of the past, but the concern that you are raising is a very, very legitimate one, and one that we are focusing on. We have to combat heroin yet again, and we are doing so.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much, Senator Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Senator Grassley asked me just one thing here. Attorney General Holder, is my understanding correct that you will not commit to providing Senator Grassley a list of your recusals?
A list of my recusals?
Yes. The list of recusals that he was requesting when he examined you just a moment ago.
What I said was that I would consider that request.
Yeah, so my understanding is correct that you're not committing to provide that for him. Is that correct?
I said I would consider it.
You have repeatedly said that your decision to try Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in Article 3 courts is because that's where you have the best chance to prosecute, that the chances of success are enhanced in Article 3 courts, and that you have access to all the evidence, so you're in a better position to judge than those who are ignorant of that evidence are. How could you be more likely to get a conviction in federal court when Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is already asked to plead guilty before military commission and be executed? How could you be more likely to get a conviction in an Article 3 court than that?
Well, Senator, you're dealing with...
We will have ordered these hearings, as I always do, whether people are supportive or opposed to any position I take. That we must have order. We will have order. The police will remove those who don't.
Mr. Chairman, let me say that your request for order is exactly appropriate, and I concur with that. Could you answer my question, Mr. Attorney General?
The determination I make on where I think we can best try these cases is not dependent on the whims or the desires of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. He said he wanted to do that then. I have no idea what he wants to do now with regard to these military commissions that, as a result of the work that this committee did and this Congress did, now has enhanced protections and I think are better than they once were before. He may still want to do that in the military commission. I have no idea. My job is to look at the possibilities. Article 3, military commission, where is my best chance of success? On
well, if I could interrupt, it would seem to me that given the fact...
I decided that Article 3 courts were the best place to do that.
Right. I know that's what
Sheikh Mohammed is not making this decision. The Attorney General...
Of course he's not. Mr. Attorney General, you've based this on where you think you're more likely to get a conviction. You talked about the best chance to prosecute, the chances of success are enhanced, and so on. One of the factors has to be the fact that he has at least at some time asked to plead guilty. I mean, you had to have taken that into account.
That was then. I don't know what Khalid Sheikh Mohammed wants to do now, and I'm not going to base a determination on where these cases ought to be brought on what a terrorist, what a murderer wants to do. He will not select the prosecution venue. I will select it, and I have.
But my understanding is that one of the key reasons for your decision is where you think you're going to have the best chance of success. One would think that his expressed desire to plead guilty in the military commission would have some effect on your decision.
Well, Senator Kyle, with all respect, today is, I don't know, November 16th, 17th, I'm not sure what the date is. Do we know as a fact right now that that is in fact what he wants to do? Do we know that? Do I have some special information? Do you have some special information that is what Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is planning to do or continuing to plan to do?
Why is it more likely that that he will be convicted in a federal court than he would before a military commission, particularly given the fact, surely you're not arguing that it's easier to get evidence in to an Article 3 court than it is in a military commission. I mean, you made the point that you're aware of a lot of evidence in this case that others aren't, of course, but the rules for admitting evidence are more lenient before military commissions than in Article 3 courts. So that can't be the basis for your decision, is it?
That is not necessarily the case. With regard to the evidence that would be elicited in a military commission, evidence elicited from them, from the detainees, from the terrorists as a result of these enhanced interrogation techniques, it is not clear to me at all that that information would necessarily be admitted in a military commission, even with the use of a clean team, or that it would withstand appellate scrutiny. And on the basis of that concern and other things, my desire to go to an Article 3 court and to minimize the use of that kind of information, that kind of evidence, I thought was paramount.
Suppose that another terrorist of the same kind as KSM argues that he too should be tried in an Article 3 court, but he's one of the ones destined for a military commission. On what basis do you argue against that request, since this appears to be simply a subjective judgment on your part as to which court it's easier to get a conviction in?
It's not a question of where I think we can get an easier conviction. It's a question of looking at the protocol that exists, talking to the Secretary of Defense and other people and trying to make determinations of where cases are more appropriately held. The case, for instance, involving the Cole that involves Mr. Nashiri, an attack on an American warship, it seems to me, is something that is uniquely situated for a military commission as opposed to an Article 3.
But how do you answer the rationale that the more heinous crime is the killing of civilians, and therefore is more ripe for resolution in military commission than in Article 3 court?
I'm not making value judgments about which case is more heinous or which lives are more valuable. I'm looking simply at the facts and at the protocols and trying to make determinations as to where cases are appropriately cited.
It's hard to understand a rationale, though, that when you kill 3,000 almost civilians, that therefore calls for Article 3 as opposed to military commission. The logic of that escapes me.
Well, the federal law that governs the administration of the death penalty dictates that cases should be brought in the place where the offense occurred. So that is at least another factor that I think has to be used in trying to determine where the cases should be brought.
Well, that assumes that the person is in the United States for one thing and he's not. Let me just close with this point. You said, and this really bothers me, Mr. Attorney General, with all due respect, for 8 years, justice has been delayed for the victims of the 9/11 attacks. I want to put in the record, Mr. Chairman, ask unanimous consent to insert in the record an article called Justice Delayed by Andrew McCarthy.
Objection.
I'll just quote two paragraphs from this. This is chutzpah writ large, he writes. The principal reason there were so few military trials is the tireless campaign conducted by leftist lawyers to derail military tribunals by challenging them in the courts. Many of those lawyers are now working for the Obama Justice Department. That includes Holder, whose firm, Covington & Burling, volunteered its services to at least 18 of America's enemies in lawsuits they brought against the American people. And he concludes, within 2 years, KSM and 4 fellow war criminals stood ready to plead guilty and proceed to execution. But then the Obama administration blew into Washington. Want to talk about delay? Obama shut down the commission despite the jihadists' efforts to conclude it by pleading guilty. Obama's team permitted no movement of the case for 11 months and now has torpedoed a perfectly valid commission case, despite keeping the commission system for other cases, so that we can instead endure an incredibly expensive and burdensome civil trial that will take years to complete. The witness can surely respond to what I said.
I don't even know where to begin. Other than to say that, you know, this notion of leftist lawyers somehow prolonging this, the vast majority of the time in which these matters were not brought to trial, to fruition, happened in the prior administration. The Supreme Court, not, I think, a group of leftist lawyers, had concerns about the way in which some of the commissions were, the way in which the commissions were constructed. The Congress reenacted, and I think appropriately so, the way in which the commissions were constructed. This is not a Congress peopled only with leftist lawyers, as Mr. McCarthy would say. So, you know, that makes for nice rhetoric, and it makes for, you know, good, I guess, fodder on the talk shows and all of that stuff, you know, but I'm here to talk about facts and evidence, real American values, and not the kinds of polemics that he seems prone to. So, you know, that's, I'm not worried about Mr. McCarthy.
I put into the record the statistics since 9/11. Since September 11, 2001, the Department of Justice has brought 119 terrorism cases in federal court with a conviction rate over 90%. Since January 1st, 2009, more than 30 individuals charged with terrorism violations have been either successfully prosecuted and or sentenced in federal courts nationwide. And there are currently more than 200 inmates in Bureau of Prison custodies who have a history of or a nexus to international terrorism were convicted by federal courts. Our next witness is...
Mr. Chairman, I would just add that I don't doubt that you can try people successfully in federal court, but there are other issues that have been raised here about that. And I understand Senator Kyl has asked the names of these cases and the defendants, but has not received information on that. Will you provide that?
The names of?
Names of the cases and defendants that you say are pending or have been tried and convicted, and what they've been tried and convicted of.
Of the material support charges, is that?
You said there are 300 cases. I'd like all 300 of them, when they were tried, when they were convicted, and what they were charged with.
What I said was that there were 300 people in the federal system, the Federal Bureau of Prisons.
Well, will you provide the names and what they've been charged with and why they're being detained? You haven't done so with Senator Kyl's request.
I think we can let the witness
I just like a yes or no.
Well, then,
I don't think that was necessarily the request that was made, but I will certainly, at least I think that Senator Kyl, I thought, was asking what Senator Grassley had asked about, but that was not quite the same thing.
Well, my understanding is previously
I will supply you with those 300 names and what they were convicted of. I'll be glad to do that.
Thank you.
The only member of this committee who actually lives in New York City is
Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn, and proudly so. I visited there with you.
Yes, you did.
Is Senator Schumer, and I yield to Senator Schumer.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Attorney General.